So for the first time in history, I think we do not have any follow-up this time, Joe.
It's not legit. Not legit follow-up, I should say.
That happens when you don't have action items, though. So,
Though, I might be able to break that. I was looking, so you've got the 2 here, and it occurred to me, was it yesterday? That I started doing something that I've been talking about and trying to do for a long time and actually saw results on it, so that there might be like some long-term follow-up.
oh, that counts.
If we wanted to
let's
dig into the archives. Joe's been meditating lately.
What?
And actually kind of got some results out of it that I'm pretty comfortable with. So, yeah, I'm a bit dumbfounded by it right now, but yes.
So details. What are you using? How is this happening?
Yeah, all the stuffs. Part of the reason I attempted it again, because I didn't even tell you I was doing this. This is for the listeners, this is Mike's
You did not.
genuine reaction because he had no clue I was bringing
I'm
this
finding out on the fly.
It's no secret, I joined a corporation here not too long ago and have been working through a lot of that transition, going to work for someone else, all kinds of details that go with that we're not going to go into quite yet. But with that, it meant that I had a lot more on my plate and had a lot to learn, a huge transition, lots going on. And as such, things got a little chaotic for me. And with the health issues that I've been working through lately, it occurred to me that my brain was just all over the place. So I sat down, I think it's been about a week ago now, and pulled out Oak, which is the app I usually trial with that, and sat down and did a 10-minute meditation and was convinced it did nothing. But then I told myself, like, well, it usually takes a few days. Like, people say that, the first time doesn't always have the immediate results. So I attempted day 2 and thought, I think I feel like I'm a little more focused at the moment. Maybe, I don't know. So then that was enough to get me to try day 3. And after I completed my 10-minute meditation on day 3, it occurred to me that I was going back into some of my corporate job a lot more on point and could stick with things a little bit better and could help bring other people back on task whenever they try to derail a conversation about something specific. So I've continued doing that daily, and it seems to be helping me quite a bit right now. And I'll make 2 points here. One is I don't do this first thing in the morning because at that point my mind is already pretty calm at that stage. So trying to settle down is not hard at all. But if I wait until about 10 a.m. when all the craziness is full force and then go take a break, that makes a big difference. So I'm finally seeing some results from meditation after how long, Mike? Has this been like a year and a half of on and off experiments with meditation? I don't know how long it's been. It's been a while.
It's been so long that I've given up on it. Yeah. So the cat being let out of the bag, I guess. We kind of talked about this on a recent episode of Focused where we had Chris Bailey on. Chris and David went back and forth quite a bit about the effectiveness they've gotten from meditation. I just kind of had to sit there quietly because I found that I don't do that anymore and kind of have replaced that with an extended prayer time in the morning, which I am still formulating my thoughts on how and why that may be more effective for me. So I don't want to get into that quite yet, but kind of what I'm realizing, I think, is that I see the benefit of meditation. I think a different application of it for me is more effective. So I've kind of gotten away from I was using Headspace, logging into Headspace and doing that for 10 minutes a day. I may go back to that at some point. I don't know though. I can't say that I've extremely missed it. And that feels kind of weird for me to say that because of how high I was on it not too long ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a feeling I'll be revisiting it at some point, but as of right now, it's kind of been replaced.
I will say it's a bit odd to say that it's been helpful, because to me it tells me that not necessarily that meditation is a great thing that I need to be doing, but it's more of an indicator that my life got so chaotic that 10 minutes is making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's been the indicator to me. So from my stance, it has more to do with I need to be focusing on trying to alleviate some of what's causing that chaos. So it's prompting me to ask some other questions. I don't think any of those will come up today. We'll find out. But it's at least prompting some conversations, both me with myself as well as conversations with my wife about what do I do to eliminate some of that chaos? Because if meditation is having this big of an impact, one, it's great. I'll continue doing it during this time. But once we get past that chaotic period, will it continue to have that impact? It's hard to say.
Sure.
I will probably at that point drop it just to find out. But
well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I guess kind of the
fair.
thing that was surprising to me is that I'm kind of going through this season right now where everything I know is wrong, right? So it's really stressful trying to figure out a new normal and trying to launch this course. And in the midst of that, the thing that previously had given me a sense of calm and control has fallen by the wayside. So I kind of anticipated that I would be hearing from my wife, who has to put up with my shenanigans, that you've been really edgy lately, yada, 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 what was happening before. But that hasn't been the case. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure part of it I attribute to my different, I rejiggered my morning routine. And like I said, I've got a little bit different and extended prayer time in the morning. So I kind of think that's kind of taken the place, but I haven't seen the negative ramifications that you would typically expect from walking away from something like this, especially after you saw positive gains from it in the first place.
Yep.
So
don't know. I'll let the experiment continue. We'll see.
You be the guinea pig and report back.
Okay. I'll try.
I did put a couple other things in the follow-up here because we didn't have any action items, but there were a couple of cool things that happened in the Bookworm Club. So first of all, there was a little bit of a conversation, which you were more active in than I was. So I wanted to say thanks to Martin McGowan and Awful Otter. I have no idea who Awful Otter is, but that's an awesome, awesome screen name, for helping me understand a little bit better Paul Van Riper's victory. They, at least when I read through those comments, my response was a little bit more tempered. I felt a little bit less righteous indignation for all the wrongs that had happened to Paul Van Riper. So thank you for providing more context for that, everybody.
Yeah. And just to clarify, that's for Paul Van Riper was the leader, the rogue general on the red team during the Millennium Challenge war games. So
yep.
if you don't remember who Paul Van Riper is.
Yeah, and we just read the book and thought we understood it all, and these people said, no, I've actually been involved in these. It makes sense.
Which, number one, was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Somebody had firsthand experience with these war games, but at the same time, it's like, okay, yeah, there is another side of this. So,
yep. So thank you for contributing and completing the picture a little bit more for me. The other one I want to call out is I want to say thank you to everybody who voted for Atomic Habits so that Joe and I can talk about it next time, because this has been a long time in the making, I feel, and now we have justification for it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, we'll get to that when we get there, but yes, I'm about 50 pages into it as we're recording this one, and I picked it up this morning. So that'll tell you a little bit. There.
Yep, no spoilers, but that story at the beginning, holy cow, right?
Yeah. Yep.
All right, so teaser, put a pin in that one. Come back next time. This time, we're talking about a different book, one that I had picked, and actually one that was highly voted on the Bookworm Club, and that is The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Now, the reason that I picked this one was basically I wanted to do something that people had voted for in the club, and this was the top vote getter, or one of the top vote getters, if not the top vote getter.
So right now, as we're recording this one, there are two at the top: Atomic Habits and The Four Tendencies. Huh.
All right, there we go. So it was the top. I was right. Gretchen Rubin is also somebody that I have heard a lot about in the productivity space over the last several years, but I have never read or listened to anything by her. And I know she has a podcast. I know she's written several books, so this was kind of weird that I had not come across any of her work before. And so I picked this basically to remedy that. And this is an interesting book that is basically built around an assessment that she created and provides a framework of explaining how and why we act the way that we do, which is where the name, the 4 Tendencies, comes from. She breaks it down into 4 different groups: the upholder, the questioners, the obligers, and the rebels. And she's got this cool little diagram at the very beginning, which kind of explains very simply what each of these are. We're going to get into each of them in more depth as we go here. But just real briefly, she's got this like Venn diagram sort of a thing. The upholders are people who meet both outer and inner expectations. Questioners resist outer expectations but meet inner expectations. Obligers meet outer expectations but resist inner expectations, and rebels resist both outer and inner expectations. So if you were to just like combine this whole book down into a single page diagram, yeah, that's what she does right at the beginning of the book.
Yeah, and I do just want to clarify, like it's easy to say upholder, questioner, obliger, rebel, meeting outer and inner expectations, but sometimes it's hard to, at least I struggled at least at first to understand, well, okay, what do you mean by outer and inner expectations? Essentially, what I came to was that outer expectations is when someone else wants you to do something or asks you to do something. Do you jump and say sure, or do you resist that? That would be the outer expectations. The inner expectations would be things like, I'm going to go for a run every day this week, or every other day this week. Like, that's an expectation you're putting on yourself. So that's an inner desire that you're giving yourself. So do you easily and readily meet those whenever you give yourself those tasks, or do you resist those?
Yep.
And depending on where you're at in this 4-circle Venn diagram of sorts, it dictates whether or not you have the tendency to meet those outer or inner expectations.
Yep. Exactly. So let me give a really ridiculous example. You're using the event of recording Bookworm as the what we want to have happen here. Okay, so the upholder would say, Joe expects me to show up for Bookworm, and I expect myself to show up and record Bookworm. Therefore, I'm going to show up and record Bookworm. The questioner is going to say, well, I want to show up and record Bookworm, but I really don't know why Joe wants me to show up and record Bookworm, but I'm going to do it anyways because I'm going to meet that inner expectation. The obliger says, Joe expects me to show up. I don't really want to, but because Joe expects me to show up, I'm going to show up. And the rebel is going to say, I'm not going to show up unless I want to. It just so happens that I want to. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. The one differentiating thing I would throw out there is that the rebel would potentially show up late.
True.
Just because they don't want to be locked into a time frame. Like they don't want to be told when something or what something. They want to do things on their own.
Yeah, they have to want to do it.
Yeah, so as long as it fulfills something that they really want to do and they're allowed to do it on their own schedule, they'll jump right in. But telling them they're going to record at 1:30 on a Saturday afternoon, probably going to get some pushback.
Yep. Right. So everybody has their primary tendency and then kind of like a secondary tendency. We'll get into our results here in a little bit. But another way to clarify this, I think, would be to share the jokes that she tells at the beginning, which are kind of cringeworthy, but I do think it helps explain what each one of these does. So you've been warned. All right. So did you remember these jokes, by the way?
I didn't. I was just looking them up because I don't recall them.
Well, we'll do them right now, though. We'll do them live, okay? So live reaction here. So Joe, how do you get an upholder to change a light bulb?
Ask them to.
He's already changed it. I'm going to put in a little drum sound effect right there.
See, this is good. I kind of know the expectations here too.
All right. So how do you get a questioner to change a light bulb?
I should know this now.
Why do we need to change that light bulb anyway?
Fair. It's the obliger that you could just ask.
Yep. How do you get an obliger to change a light bulb? Ask them to change it. And then how do you get a rebel to change a light bulb?
They're not going to change the light bulb.
Do it yourself.
Love it.
So, yeah, those were very corny jokes, which were sent to her by somebody as an explanation for the 4 different tendencies, and she liked them, so she put them in the first chapter of the book. And I do think you can really see the different tendencies in those responses. So there you have it, little 4 tendencies humor for you. Should we dive into the specific tendencies?
Yeah, and I just want to call out that we're going to go through these 4, and there is a quiz in the book. Do you remember the URL? We should get that in the show notes because I think it'd be cool for folks to take this test themselves. It was pretty quick. What was it? 5 minutes, maybe, if that.
Therein lies a rant.
Yeah. So,
but we'll stick a pin in that. I don't remember what the URL was because it's not like 4tendencies.com. It's related to her podcast, but we'll definitely put the link in the show notes. You can go through it for free. And like you said, it just takes about 5 minutes. So I did it. My wife did it. And I know you did it. And Becky did it as well, right?
Yeah. So it's quiz.gretchenrubin.com.
Oh, okay. That's not the one that I saw in my book, but if it goes the same place.
Well, it's because I'm a web developer. The actual URL was like better podcast something /quiz, but it redirects to quiz.gretchenrubin.com. So if you want to bypass all the redirects,
that's easier.
That's how you do
all
it.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it is. So anyway, quiz.gretchenrubin.com. That'll get you to the quiz that you can take. Again, it's super quick. We'll get into that later. But these 4, Mike and I have already taken this. Our spouses have both, Rachel and Becky have both taken this quiz as well. So our goal here is we're going to go through these, but when we get to ours or our spouses, we'll talk about some of those from a personal stance to some degree, as much as we can, in a way to help explain them. I think it would be a lot easier that way, as opposed to just talking about them and then sharing our results at the end.
Yes. Theoretically, it will be a lot easier that way.
I don't know. We'll find out. Go by the seat of your pants. So that brings us to the first one, Mike.
Yeah, the first one is the upholder, and this is me. So the upholder is the one who meets both outer and inner expectations. The phrase that she uses at the top of this is that discipline is my freedom. And that part resonates with me. So at this point, I'm like, yeah, you nailed me. Good job. And then she goes into like the strengths and weaknesses, which real briefly here, there's a bunch of them. By the way, this part of the book, as she gets into these in the sections, was a little bit confusing because she just ties them all together in running paragraphs. And then at the end distills them down to like 5 or 6 points, which are always like completely missing from the paragraphs that she wrote. Or is that just me?
I didn't notice that when I went through it, but then again, you're an upholder.
True. So just as an example, some of the strengths, like when she's going through the paragraph, she talks about how you readily meet expectations. You're often very intrigued by rules. If you decide to do something, you do it. High degree of self-mastery, rarely suffer from resentment or burnout, don't depend on others for motivation. But then at the end of the chapter, she has like simple phrases, which I think are a lot more concise and maybe better. So self-starter, self-motivated, sticks to a schedule and reliable as an example. And that kind of bugged me because I'm going through those descriptions. I'm trying to jot down some notes and then I get to the end and like, well, I should just wrote that down. I'm just going to jump to the end of the chapter and write those down next time. Now, if there ever was an upholder, see, I don't know. Is that like upholder rebellion? I don't even know how you would describe that. That's my big issue with this is like when I got through the upholder section, I was like, yes, this is totally me. But then we went through all the other sections and I was like, oh, but I also do that. And in this context, I also do that. So I don't know. Maybe it's not so simple. But anyways, those are the strengths. What was your opinion of the upholder as you read through this? I know Gretchen mentions she's an upholder too, and I feel like this is the first one she goes through, and she's kind of telling her story, but were you kind of bored with it at this point, or were you connecting to it? I mean, obviously I was, because it was my tendency, but as a non-upholder, what was your reaction?
Yeah, going through this, obviously I'm not an upholder, but going through it, I could see how a lot of people would like to be an upholder, because my perception of it was that if an upholder wants to do something, they can motivate themselves to do it and don't have to fight themselves. Mm-hmm. So you can go through and say, I'm going to work on this video course every day, and you don't struggle with that at all.
Theoretically.
Now, here's the trick with this, and I can sense, because going through this and looking at each of these, every single one of them I could see aspects of myself in. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people will do that, which is why she doesn't say the 4 personalities, and she doesn't say the 4 productivity types or something like that. It's tendencies. Like, you don't stick to this at all times. It's just the core one that you lean towards. So I don't think she spelled that out very well. I wish she had, but I only gathered that from the title of the book. She never really calls that out anywhere in this. She does mention, like, you have, like, within each of these, you'll have a tendency to lean towards the ones that are next to it, not directly opposite of it. So, like, an upholder usually doesn't lean towards a rebel, and a rebel doesn't usually lean towards an upholder, but an upholder can lean towards a questioner or an obliger pretty easy.
Yeah, based on that Venn diagram.
Yeah, so again, and there's a picture of that Venn diagram on that quiz page, so quiz.gretchenrubin.com. Like, there is a picture of it there. I don't know if we'll get it in the show notes or not, but you can take a look at that, and you'll see how those two tend to lean over each other, but they don't, like, the upholder and the rebel don't overlap at all.
See, I think I'm exhibit A for they do. But you don't understand how that's even possible on the framework that she puts forth. So
I wondered if it was possible for the opposites to also overlap.
Yep.
Not just the sides. Because, again, me personally, I saw aspects of all 4 of these in myself, but I definitely have one that I lean towards, and that I am for the most part. So I get your point that you can pull all those apart, but I also don't think she's trying to say this is 100% all you ever do. She's just pointing to, this is your tendency that you tend to fall back on.
Okay.
Is that fair?
That could very well be. That's definitely not the impression that I got reading this, because she doesn't flat out say, like, you shouldn't get a job in this area if you're this tendency, but the way she wrote it kind of felt prescriptive to me, where it was like, this is the way that you work, so you should do this when you're working with somebody else of this type. It's not just flow in a different tendency, because it's
right.
That's not any of the advice that she gives isn't tailored that way. It's kind of like, this is who you are. You can't change who you are, so you have to do things this way if you want to get what you want, which is the last section of this book, by the way, is applying the 4 tendencies. But
right. And then another way that I thought about it too, like, do you know, so upholders typically can lean towards questioners or obligers. Do you know which one you lean towards?
I do. I wrote this down. I want to make sure I get it right. I'm an upholder obliger.
Yeah, that would have been my guess. Now, one of the aspects that we'll talk about later is obligers have this rebellion side.
Yep.
So if you're, and this is something else I thought about. Okay, upholders, through what she's talking about, if they tip towards questioners or obligers, questioners and obligers can also tip towards a rebel. And if an upholder can tip towards those, to me, it's not that far of a stretch to say if you can tip towards questioners or obligers, by proxy, you get to the rebel side as well. Like, you can also get to it that way. So I don't know if any of that actually holds true. There wasn't, and I wrote this point down, she doesn't have science behind this.
No, she does not.
Like, this isn't one of these books that you bring in and say, you know, we did this study and we've verified it through these 6 follow-up studies. Like that's not this type of book, which I was torn by because number one, it's kind of refreshing because that's most of the books we go through is just very science heavy. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like, okay, how much truth is there in this?
Yeah.
Probably some, maybe quite a bit. I don't know. But if you're looking for a book that comes at this type of model that's very science-based, this is not it. She's very much using personal experience and borderline random online surveys to get at some of this. So
yeah, and the survey itself isn't even that long. I think it was like 13 total questions or something.
Yeah,
which again, it doesn't have to be 1,000 questions and 100 research studies done on it to validate its effectiveness. She was looking for a tool to reinforce some observations that she had made. And I think there is a kernel of truth in the observations that she had made. I do have a rant at the end, so we'll get to that in a little bit.
Sure.
Should talk about my weaknesses.
Yeah.
So the weaknesses of an upholder, they generally feel compelled to observe rules even when it's more sensible to ignore them. Totally me. Become impatient when others don't live up to expectations. Also me. Can become disapproving and uneasy when others misbehave. That's definitely me. Find it difficult to delegate because they doubt others will follow through. This is the one that got me because when I was working with Asian Deficiency, Tan had me working with a VA, and I had so much trouble working with this VA, and I was like, this just isn't working. When I read this, I was like, oh, that makes sense because everybody else was able to work with her, and they were able to get results, but I just couldn't ever get it to work. So maybe that's why. It's my upholder tendencies. To others, the ways of an upholder seem extreme. Yep. Can sometimes seem cold and inflexible. Yep. Defensive, rigid, can seem humorless or uptight. I take issue with this one, but maybe it's true. I don't know. And then demanding. That's definitely true. They're not very glamorous, edgy, or endearing. Okay. Well, so there's parts of this that, she's reading my mail. There's other parts of this which maybe I'm just choosing to say like that's I don't want to identify with that part of it. Some of these weaknesses, though, like I said, I totally identify with. She also explains the concept of tightening with upholders. This is where it becomes harder and harder to make an exception, to take a break or lighten up. This definitely is something that I have dealt with. So you just continue to do these things that you've always done, and it's hard to let things go. Say, I'm not going to do that anymore. And I think with the upholders specifically, my life personally, if I'm not careful, can get to the point where I've signed up to meet all of these different expectations, and I just go through the things, and I try to get just a little bit more efficient. But I also think that the last several years have taught me a lot about the concept of effectiveness and how you need to make sure that you're doing the right things. So this is something that I wouldn't say I struggle with anymore anyways. The 3 questions that I mentioned in the personal retreat course are kind of key to that. What should I start doing, stop doing, and keep doing? And I make myself pick something to stop doing every single time. So maybe I've just built systems which are going to combat against this. But this whole idea of tightening is something that people need to be aware of, because you don't even see the expectation creep, I guess. I don't think that's a term. I'm going to use that though. I think it kind of makes sense. Just like project creep, expectation creep, and you just keep tightening the screws and squeezing out a little bit more efficiency until at some point, something's got to give. And this can occur in any context, not just work, which is typically what people think of when they think of productivity, is how can I crank out more widgets? How can I get a little bit more work done during my day? I don't really like that definition of productivity. I think productivity is just doing what you intend to do. And you can apply that to your personal life as well. But this is definitely something that is worth calling out here for all of my fellow upholders who maybe are dealing with this. This is something that you should be aware of.
Something I want to call out here, just because I find it entertaining. 2 of the weaknesses that you pointed out, which oddly enough you saved for the very end of this list, and yet on the list that she gives us there, the first 2 are defensive and rigid.
Because they're at the end of the chapter.
But it's interesting to me that you're fighting some of this and not wanting to be boxed into just the upholder when that is an aspect of that personality in itself. It's just an interesting point.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
Because I'm not one that wants to say this is the gospel truth. Like, this is just a rough guideline. I'm willing to say that, but it seems like you're trying to lock in on one or the other. I'm not sure that that's what you're doing, but it's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. Well, maybe I got to do my rant now. Okay, so
we can pin it and we'll come back later if you want. That's fine. We can go on to questioners. That's fine.
Okay. Well, before we do that, let me give you a couple hints for dealing with an upholder, because this is another part of each one of these chapters, which I think is worthwhile. This is probably the most valuable part here. So if you were to boil down what can you get out of this book, recognizing the way other people work and learning how to speak their language, there's a ton of value just in that. So dealing with an upholder, they hate to miss expectations. They have trouble setting priorities because they all seem important. See, again, like there's something that like I don't have trouble with that, but maybe that's just because of the work that I've done the last several years. Upholders are self-motivated. They want to meet expectations, but they don't like it when their schedule gets changed. Yep. A casual comment like you should do X might set off enormous and unintended expectations. Totally. I've done that where someone has made a comment and then I've run with it and then like, oh, actually, I didn't really mean that. I was just kind of thinking out loud. They may become angry or defensive at the suggestion that they dropped the ball or made a mistake, and they put a high value on a follow-through. That term in particular is interesting to me because a while back I read for one of my Gap books, what was it called? It's the one that written by Kathy Kolbe, the person behind the Kolbe assessment. The Conative Connection, that's what it was. And one of the scales in the Kolbe assessment is follow-through. So I kind of am wondering, is there a correlation between these four tendencies and the Kolbe assessment? I bet there would be, but also the Kolbe is like the science-based version of this. So there'd probably be some inconsistencies too. But I kind of think that like the upholder, that maybe aligns with the follow-through. The rebel is going to be the quick start. The questioner is going to be the fact finder, and then the obliger would line up with the implementer.
I was curious to see how like the strengths finder lines up with these, because I bet there's a lot of correlation with those as well. But yeah, I think you have a good point. Like at the end of each of these, like there's a whole chapter on dealing with an upholder, questioner, obliger, rebel, and it's very helpful to go through that because she spells out in each of those, like, okay, if you have an upholder that you're working with and this is at work, or you are married to them, or it's an upholder child, if they are a health client, or if you're picking a career, like, she goes through each of those and tells a couple stories for each of those scenarios, which is super helpful. And again, I think to your point, like those are extremely valuable areas because once you've learned about the tendency, then you kind of get some action, not necessarily action items, but examples of how it can be applied.
Yep.
And I know we're spending a lot of time here on upholder. It's the first one. We're explaining some of the book layout, so I get that. But yes, I did find that section in each of these areas quite helpful.
Cool. Should we move on to the next one, which is questioner?
Yes. Now, I'll introduce this one because questioner is exactly what it sounds like. They like to ask a lot of questions. They meet inner expectations very readily, but tend to resist outer expectations. And this is my wife, Becky. So she falls into this category. And as I was reading this, I was like, yep, you do all of this. So this has prompted a lot of conversations between us, thankfully, before this recording, simply because I was like, okay, tell me how your brain ticks in this way. So it was very fascinating. But just to kind of go through the strengths side of this, looking at the summary of this, the points here are data-driven. They are fair-minded according to their own judgment, interested in creating systems that are efficient and effective. They're willing to play devil's advocate, comfortable with bucking the system if it's warranted. They are inner-directed and unwilling to accept authority without justification. And I had all kinds of points here, just kind of going through this with my wife. Like, okay, Becky, you're definitely one that's just super focused on data. Like, this woman can research like nobody's business. And it's because she's got tons and tons of questions about things, which is awesome because you really get deep on what's the right decision. And usually they come out with awesome decisions as a result. So it was fascinating to kind of work through that. Data-driven and need justification, always asking why. Like, if you can convince a questioner about the rationale behind a decision, they are all in. But if they question or have second thoughts on the reasoning behind a decision, they're going to fight and continue being quizzical. Even so much so that Gretchen told a couple stories about some folks who lost their jobs because their boss thought they were being insubordinate or not going along with what their expectations were, when really they were just trying to find the justification for what they were being asked to do. So it was very interesting. So what was your take on the strength side of that, Mike?
Well, when I read the strength side of this, I thought to myself, okay, I was wrong. I'm actually a questioner. I can tell you from working with the family business, the thing that has caused the most friction between my dad and myself has been my dad. I guess the Colby term for it would be he's a quick start. So he just has an idea and he goes and does it. And I'm like, well, no, why are we going to do that? Or what if we did it this way? And he just would get so frustrated with me because I would always have another question. And to him, it's a challenge and it's a dragging of my feet that I don't want to do this thing. And really, I just want to be able to connect to the vision, which really, like, he hasn't articulated yet. It's just this gut instinct, and that's how he works, So that caused a lot of friction and lots of different examples from lots of different other organizations and teams that I've worked with over the years. So I definitely get the wanting to know why and being driven by the data part of this.
Now, the flip side of this is the weaknesses side. Can suffer analysis paralysis. Definitely true. There are times my wife, I have to tell her, it's like, just decide already. Like, you've been researching this for a month and a half. We're talking about a pair of shoes. Please, just buy a pair. Like, it'll be okay.
Okay, so true story. About, 4 months ago, I started doing some research on weighted blankets because I was like, this sounds like a great idea. I definitely want one of these. So I was looking at the different options and spent probably about a month researching them and could not make a decision. So eventually just walked away from it. And then my wife surprised me with one for Christmas, which I absolutely love, but I never would have picked it because I couldn't make the decision.
Yep. So anyway, analysis paralysis, that's it to a T right there. Impatient with what he or she sees as others' complacency. And that, I think that can come out with things like waiting in lines was the example she mentioned. Like, questioners typically have issues with waiting in line because if there's a line, that means there's an inefficiency somewhere, and the business or operation should be doing something to solve that inefficiency. So
this is, again, totally me. Like, if you ever watch me waiting in line for the first 30 seconds, I do pretty good. And then I start fidgeting, and then the phone comes out. And by the time I get to the register, even if it's only like 5 minutes, I'm sighing real big and I'm like looking around, rolling my eyes because I just can't stand waiting in line.
So maybe you...
So again, questioner tendencies. I don't know.
Maybe you're really close to that upholder questioner line. Maybe you're right in there.
Could be.
All right. What else is here? Crackpot potential. Unable to accept closure on matters that others consider settled if questions remain unanswered. Yeah, that I could see that
Definitely me.
Yeah. My wife will sometimes continue asking me questions on things that I thought we had already decided and in some cases already completed, and yet we're still talking about it. It's like, why? This is already done.
Yep.
But yes, she needs to have those questions answered. They may refuse to observe expectations that others find fair or at least non-optional. The example given was traffic regulations. Sometimes questioners will violate traffic regulations because they don't understand why those rules are in place and they don't make sense. Like, well, that could get you in trouble.
That one seemed weird to me. I mean, maybe it's just I don't really understand this, but since you live with the questioner, when was the last time Becky was like, I'm just going to go the wrong way?
Yeah, that one.
Why is this here?
Traffic regulations she doesn't struggle with that one. And I think that's because she has accepted the rationale from a broad stance of regulations of someone else has thought this through in detail. And if I follow these, this is the safest way to operate. So because these rules are in place, this is the safe way to go. So she's bought in on that. So she doesn't question those. So yes, she's fine in that regard. When it gets to things like, I'm trying to think of an example, like when you start talking about things around like health insurance or a healthcare sharing ministry or simple things like when should paperwork be filled out, like she has tons and tons of questions around those and will sometimes try to skirt those systems. So I could see it in that regard, but when it comes to traffic, no, she won't do that.
Okay.
But probably one of the keystone aspects here is that questioners may resist answering others' questions. Now, this just baffled me. It's like, okay, questioners, and I know there are some of you listening. You will ask tons and tons of questions, but the moment someone turns around and starts asking you similar questions, you get impatient and frustrated. To me, that is just bonkers. Like, come on. Like, you're the one asking questions. Like, like that didn't make sense to me. But I understand it, and I asked my wife about it. It's like, okay, why is this? Why is it that if I start asking you questions in the same way that you ask me questions, you get angry with me? Like, why is that? And it's because, at least according to my wife and in her scenario, it's because she's already thought through the whole thing. She's already done all the research. She understands exactly why she's doing something. She's fully justified it. You have no business questioning me on my decision because I've already done all the hard work and come to that decision. So there's no point rehashing any of this because it's already made. Like that's her mentality anyway. That's the way she put it. So I was very entertained by that. It was very interesting.
Yeah, in the book, Gretchen Rubin describes it as they'd rather not explain themselves because it's exhausting to revisit it. And that one made sense to me, although hearing you describe it in Becky's words, I think that makes sense too, at least in a team-based scenario. So, for example, if we're going to delegate work and we're all working on this project and we're implementing Scrum, so we're going to get together in 2 weeks and have our sprint meeting, and we're going to talk about the work that was done. I can get frustrated too when people are like, okay, so like, why did we do this? And then you have to re-explain everything that already happened rather than just talk about the results. The people who want to know why, and even why we did it that way, that can be frustrating
and can sometimes get reprimanded.
Yes,
depending on the boss.
Yep. One thing I thought was interesting in this section was her advice to look to second-level reasons for motivation. I instantly thought of the 5 whys exercise from this and why that might work for some people who are questioners. You familiar with that exercise?
No.
Basic idea is if you want to get to the root motivation for something, you just keep asking yourself why. Just as an example off the top of my head, I had a goal to run a half marathon. And if you were to ask me, why did I want to run a half marathon? It's because I want to be in really good shape. Well, why do you want to be in really good shape? Because I want to be able, like if you dig down deep enough, the root is that I want to be able to play basketball, roughhouse with my kids when they're older, because I wasn't able to do that with my dad. Every time we played basketball and I was in high school, he was older, he ended up getting hurt. So I don't want that experience for my kids. I recall like having to hold back, and I don't want that. I want to be able to just be there doing it with them. I don't want them to have to change their approach because they don't want to hurt dad. So like if you dig deep enough, that's the root motivation is I want to improve the quality time that I can spend with my kids when they're older, just being boys. But you won't get there unless you keep asking the question why when you trace it all the way back to my goal of running a half marathon. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So if you have that long-term goal in mind of I want to be able to build this relationship with my kids in this specific way when they're older, that might provide a little bit more motivation than, oh, I got to go do my run today because I got this half marathon coming up in May, and maybe I should just not show up. Like that's the difference there.
So moral of the story there is questioners need to find rationale for, why they're doing something. And sometimes it's not direct. If it's something from someone else, like you can sometimes take an expectation that someone else has given you and take it to the second order and try to find intrinsic motivation for it so that you can get yourself to follow through on it. I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, exactly. Keep digging deeper and you'll find a strong enough why, which is going to provide the motivation to do the thing that you want to do. And that's really what Gretchen Rubin's talking about here.
Sure.
But the thing that I would kind of push back on, I can see why that would be valuable for a questioner, but I don't think it's any less valuable for any of the other tendencies. So, like, I understand why she put it in this chapter, but I kind of don't think that it's compartmentalized to only this chapter.
Sure. Yeah, I could see how, and we'll talk about this one shortly, but like translating that one from the questioner to the rebel, I could see that working to some degree. I don't know that would work as well for an obliger. It may have the opposite consequences, like turning it from an external expectation into an internal. Like, well, now it's one that they'll resist instead of one that they would follow through on.
Right.
Yeah, it would go so well.
Right. So let's get to the obligers. But before we do that, I also want to real quickly go through how to deal with a questioner.
All right.
So reject lazy explanations, enforce limitations to help force action. Questioners can make a spouse feel attacked or unsupported. That's something that you should just recognize, I guess, and try to steer away from if you are a questioner.
Yep.
You can't say because I said so to a questioner child. That was literally what she said in the book. And my response was, you can't say because I said so to any child. Like, that just doesn't work. And I don't want to get into parenting philosophy here necessarily, but I mean, I don't know. Do you do that?
No, but again, that's a view on parenting. So
Right. Okay. So backing slowly away from that one, it's extremely important to answer questions regarding medication for healthcare professionals. This one, I totally like the example that she shared. This made so much sense. If you have somebody in your office recognizing what tendency they are and speaking to that tendency so that they follow through and take their medication is a very, very, very good idea.
Yes.
I have medication that I have not taken before, and I looking back on it, I'm replaying the scenario, even though it was a long time ago, of being in that doctor's office and they're trying to explain to me. For example, I had a seizure when I was 18 years old. I was just out of my senior year of high school, and I was standing in line at a McDonald's with a friend of mine and had a seizure in line at the McDonald's. So they rushed me to the hospital. They gave me some medication, ended up way overprescribing my medication, and I was taking enough for a 300-pound woman. Basically, it was making me drowsy. I was sleeping like 12 hours a day and could do nothing. So dial it back, get it fixed, go away to college, and they couldn't tell me why I had a seizure. They're like, well, maybe you'll have another one. Maybe you'll be fine the rest of your life. We don't really know. So freshman at college, of course, I'm not taking my medication. And then I had another one in the fall of my freshman year at college. I've not had any issues since then. I've figured out a lot over the last, gosh, how long was that? 15, 20, almost 20 years now. But yeah, so I guess maybe I'm a questioner in that respect, but I could locate myself when they were sharing some of those stories.
Yeah, for sure. But yes, there are a lot of questions I have for questioners, but they're not received well. That said, let's go to Obliger. So this is me. Sounds like it's also Rachel.
Yep. According to the results anyways.
Yeah. This so as obligers, we meet outer expectations but resist inner expectations. Very easy to follow through on something someone else wants me to do. But when it comes to things I set out for myself to do, I fight. And yes, I was fascinated by going through this because I'm like, yep. Same scenario you had with upholders. Like, that's me, totally me. Yep, that's me. So here are some of the strengths. Good boss, responsive leader, a team player, feels great obligation to meet others' expectations, responsible, willing to go the extra mile, responds to outer accountability. That last point there, responds to outer accountability, that was a key point with this, in that it's easy for obligers to put off things they've set up for themselves in an effort to do something for someone else, unless there is external accountability, someone else holding them to follow through. And this is where I would say bookworm is key for me in this. So let's go all meta here.
Nice.
In that, if it were not for bookworm, I can guarantee you I would read 1/10 of the books that we read, if that. And it's primarily because of the fact that Mike is expecting me to show up in a week and a half from the time I pick up a book or 2 weeks from the time I pick up a book and to talk about it. Like, well, Mike is expecting me to do that, so I darn well better get my butt in gear and read that book. Like, that is a lot of it for me. And I've had this conversation with a few folks. Like, if it were not for bookworm, I would not be reading as much as I was. And that's huge. So, like, there's a prime example. Like, I will not read as much for myself, but because I get the chance to talk through it with someone else and share it with our audience, like, because all of you are listening to this, that's like the only reason I'm really focused on reading so much, because you all expect me to show up and do it. Like, that is a huge motivator for me because of the external accountability that comes with that. So there you go, Mike.
Nice. Positive peer pressure. Love it.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
This is something, though, that I kind of think, again, I have some issues with bucketing people into these 4 different tendencies, and you already tried to talk me off the ledge and say they're just tendencies, but there's a whole big section in here about picking the right kind of external accountability, and I kind of feel like this applies to anybody, whether or not you are an obliger or an upholder like me, where you do want to meet external expectations. I think this would even, if you find the right thing, that would even work for a questioner or a rebel. So some of the things that she talks about, having apps notifications or emails, an actual person, an accountability group, client, customer, or employee, deadlines, consequences for actions. Some crazy examples she shared, like somebody had scheduled an embarrassing social media post and they have to wake up on time in order to disable it every day. Somebody else would leave the gym with a friend's shoe so that they have to show up in order for him to work out the next day. Like, I kind of feel like there's a ridiculous hack, for lack of a better term, to cause you to follow through no matter what your tendency is, but external accountability, regardless of your tendency, is a good idea. So it's cool that Bookworm provides the external accountability for you to read the books and create the positive change, get the new ideas that you want to implement in your life. So you've kind of figured out how that works for you. But I guess what I'm arguing is that regardless of the obliger role, there's that potential in everybody.
Yeah, my wife would argue with you.
Well, she's a questioner, so.
I'm just saying, like, if she decided that she wanted to read books on a regular basis, she would. She wouldn't need something outside of herself to do so at all, and doesn't. Like, she reads a lot and has no one or nothing at all to hold her to that. She does a lot of things like that with no issue whatsoever. So I'm not sure I would agree with you on that. I think there are definitely nuances within each of these tendencies that I could see that, with upholders, maybe if they're leaning towards the obliger side, they definitely need that. Because I think that the opposites can lean towards each other, I could see how some questioners could do that. Rebels, if they're leaning towards one side or the other, could do the same thing. Like, I could see that, but I think if you're a questioner through and through, like, that would potentially sound like nonsense.
Yeah.
And even Gretchen Rubin, like, to her, she felt like something like that was nonsense because she doesn't need that type of accountability at all. She even wrote books that were talking about meeting goals and having a happy life, and people would write into her and say, hey, yeah, that's great. All these things you're saying to do are amazing, but how do you get yourself to do those? She's like, well, you just commit to it and you just do it. Like, that's
yeah.
like, well, no, it doesn't work that way for everybody.
No, I agree, but I guess what I'm arguing is that the different tendencies, maybe they evolve or change regarding the context. So the book example with your wife, let's just use that one for a little bit. So maybe for that one, she's totally a questioner and she is going to ask the questions and figure out the value and read the books herself. But with something else like exercise or fitness or something else, there's going to be a different tendency and a different strategy that's going to work, at least in my experience. So for example, the external accountability to read the books worked for you with Bookworm, but the external accountability to use the meditation app did not work. So why is that? It's the exact same mechanism, right? That you use this as an action item and you tried it and you couldn't stick with it, even though you didn't want to come back and say, yeah, I failed at this action item, right?
Well, no, because some people respond to an app, doing that. Some people need an actual person. I need an actual person in most scenarios. There's one scenario where it doesn't. But for the most part, it needs to be another human being, or I need to connect it to a different type of external expectation of some sort. So, like, for example, this is a good one. So health, it's no secret I'm working through all kinds of health stuff. I discovered that one area where an app does work for me is tracking. As much as I've railed against tracking in the past, what I realized is that if I track something, I'll actually follow through in logging it, and I will log it if I get it done, and I want to make sure I get it done because I know I need to log it so that the data is there. So one of the things that I need to do in my current state is keep track of how much caffeine I'm consuming and how much water I'm drinking. Like, those are two very important things that I need to be keeping an eye on. Well, every time I drink a glass of water, I make sure I log it because I need to keep an eye on how much I'm consuming across the entire day, which then means that I always know if I'm at my target for the day or not, because now that has become an external target that I'm trying to hit. So that acts as external accountability to me in that regard. But when it comes to things at my web development business, because I'm still operating that, I've learned that I need to be posting. It's a virtual team, remote team. So I'm posting and writing out what it is I need to do each day as part of our stand-ups. And that acts as a list that other people can see that are on my team, and they expect me to follow through on that. So now I've got another person expecting me to follow through on what I've committed to. So those are mechanisms that I use, but they do require the external piece. I explained some of this to my wife and how these are things that are important to me, and she looked at me like I was an idiot. Like, this is like, why do you need all this? Like, just make sure you're drinking water regularly. Like, but it doesn't work that way for me. If I just do that, I'll drink 2 glasses instead of 7. Like, that's it doesn't work that way.
Sure.
But that concept is completely foreign to her.
Okay. Well, let me come at this a different way. So
here's the defensive side of Mike coming out. Love it.
Yeah. Well, page 123, she says, obligers may assume their behavior is due to low self-esteem or lack of motivation or because of some character flaw. I have issues with that whole statement because those are some very different things that she combines into a single sentence. But let's just use self-esteem, all right? So the obliger who is not going to meet internal expectations, but is going to meet external expectations. I would argue that regardless of the obliger tendency, if you do have low self-esteem and someone is asking you to do something, you can act very much like an obliger. Right? Can we agree on that point?
I don't know. I am an obliger, so I do that anyway.
Okay. Well, see, here's the thing, and this is my rub with this whole thing. Self-esteem is an emotional intelligence skill, to come back to that argument, and it can be developed. I mean, the family business, we've got an assessment, which I almost texted you, and I'm like, hey, do you want to go through this prior to this so we can compare the results? But I didn't want to.
I almost did that too.
I didn't want to focus on that thing so much. But if you want to go through it, I'm happy to hook you up with it. But the basic idea is that there's these 12 different success skills. Self-esteem is one of them. And you take the assessment, which is a research-based assessment. I think on that one in particular, there's like 120 doctoral level papers and books that have been written on it. It's been used like 8 million times. Okay, so in terms of is this research-based, there is probably nothing more research-based. And you start with the assessment, you identify your lowest areas. So it's very possible you take that assessment and self-esteem is your lowest area. And then the research shows that these emotional intelligence skills are all interrelated. So you'll pick just the lowest ones to work on. And if you can get some positive movement in those lower areas, that actually reverberates across all of your different emotional intelligence skills. It's not like one-to-one with all the other skills, but they are related. So I've seen lots of people who have identified that they have low self-esteem, and then they go through a curriculum and they develop high self-esteem. When you have high self-esteem, maybe you're able to say, you know what, I'm not going to meet that external expectation, and I'm going to rebel against my obliger tendencies, and I'm going to stick up for me. I've seen that happen, and just because that happens one time, obviously that doesn't mean that you've now changed the way that you're wired, but that's kind of the rub with me on this, because like I said, you kind of rocked my world at the beginning when you said these are the 4 tendencies and maybe you can flow in and out of them. I actually wrote in my notes that this whole idea of emotional intelligence is a different thought process than these 4 tendencies, because the 4 tendencies are basically prescriptive. This is the way that you are, and this is the way that you should work in order to get what you want from the other tendencies. But personally, I believe that you can develop and change these emotional intelligence skills. And the key here is that you shouldn't just be excusing the behaviors that you desire to change by saying, oh, I guess I'm an obliger. I guess I'm always going to put other people's desires ahead of my own. And I'm not arguing that you can change your tendency. I guess what I'm arguing is that maybe the 4 tendencies framework is only showing like a small piece of this, and that there's a whole lot more to this concept. But this is the one where it really sticks out to me. This is also, by the way, the biggest group according to her survey results.
Yeah, like 40-some%.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know how much of this is obliger tendency and how much of it is confirmation bias for, oh, I guess I do always acquiesce to what other people want from me, you know?
I don't know. I think and she calls this out numerous times, that people can, like, this is just one aspect of a broader personality. She calls that out quite a bit. And in the section of...
What is the broader personality?
Well, there's all kinds of ways to come at that. But, even in the dealing with sections, one of those is always career, like picking a career that's good for each of these. She always says every job is doable by any of these tendencies.
Yep.
Some are just easier for others. Now, I there's all kinds of things like what you're talking about with self-esteem and stuff, and like those are all things that hit the nail on the head for me. Like that's exactly true in most of those scenarios. I think what you're getting at is emotional IQ or EQ, I think is what they'll refer to it as.
Yep.
To me, that's completely different than what we're talking about here. Like, yes, that is a thing. Yes, you can improve and change on different aspects of that. But again, this is a tendency. This is not something you're locked in on. It's not black and white. And
yeah, it would be great to get Gretchen Rubin's response to that, because I kind of feel like she was saying this is the way things are. Like she uses examples of the person asking for her slides, and she's like, well, I really don't use slides. And then like, oh, but I'm this and you're that, so you should give them to me. And she's like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I will, because that's what you are. Like when I read it, it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of wiggle room, to me anyways. If there is, that kind of changes a lot of my thoughts on this book.
Yeah, I think it depends on which one you land in, Mike, because I read this with tons and tons of leniency across all these.
Yep.
Like, to me, there was a lot of flexibility.
No, this is what she said.
Yeah, no, I didn't lock it in at all. I was like, well, there are some aspects of questioners that is me, even though it's the opposite of me. Like, I can see parts of the questioning in myself, but that didn't impact me as a like, oh my gosh, you're so wrong, Gretchen. Like, I didn't have that response at all, because to me, she calls this out. Like, yes, you can, like, these bleed over. Like, she says that. She even has entire sections on, like, obliger rebels and obliger upholders, like, in the overlap between those. Like, she even calls that out every single time. So, anyway, we don't need to keep going on this, because I need to talk about obliger rebellion here. Like, well, I guess I got weaknesses yet, which can get me to obliger rebellion. Okay, here we go. So, possible weaknesses with obligers. Susceptible to overwork and burnout, because, they do what everyone else asks them to do. May show the destructive pattern of obliger rebellion. Pin that. Exploitable. May become resentful. Has trouble saying no or imposing limits. Yes, 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 and yes. On all 5 of those. Obliger rebellion being the big one here. Now, this is what happens when people either take advantage of an obliger or don't show appreciation to said obliger, because what can happen is they will continually meet your requests until they hit that wall, and then good luck getting them to follow through again, because then they become a rebel in that sense.
Yep.
Now, to compound this, I'm pretty sure, Mike, that I'm an obliger rebel. Like, I think I lean towards the rebel side. Which is kind of entertaining, and whenever I was explaining it to Becky, she's like, what? What is wrong with you? So, because I think she's a questioner that leans towards an upholder. Opposites
attract.
So we're like directly opposite on those regards. So it's very entertaining. But yes, this obliger rebellion is something I can tell you from firsthand experience, is one that I can very easily, like, if people ask me for things, I will bend over backwards to make it happen. If Becky asks me for something, I will go to the moon to make it happen. But the moment people start asking repeatedly, and I get the feeling that they're doing it just because they think I'll follow through on it, like, then I snap, and good luck getting me to follow through. Like, it's so hard for me to break through on that. If I continue to be nagged and harassed over it, sometimes I'll still acquiesce and go with it. But a lot of times you're going to have to fight to get me to go through with something, because I'll just continually say no or just ignore it. So there you go. But yes, obliger rebellion is a real thing. I can speak firsthand on that, but it's something that people need to be aware of, for sure.
Yeah, somebody in the book described it as the big no that kind of wrecks my life for a while, which I thought was interesting. But again, like, I've dealt with this, so maybe I'm an obliger in certain areas. I don't know. But the reason that she uses for this obliger rebellion is that obligers don't protest against a troublesome situation. They expect others to know and stop imposing their expectations. Okay, so going back to the weaknesses, which you were all like, yep, that aligns with me. A lot of this comes back. Again, I don't want to keep belaboring this point, but there's an emotional intelligence scale for this too. Aggression versus deference. And on this scale, you can, regardless of which end of that scale you land on, the one you can move towards the middle, which is assertion, learning to balance what other people want from you and stand up for what you want. And the research behind the assessment tool shows that, like, people who are bullied, for example, they will defer and they will defer and they will defer and they will defer until eventually they explode because they can't keep it inside anymore. So again, that's an emotional intelligence skill that you can develop. Even if you are naturally a quote unquote obliger, you can develop the skill to be assertive and stand up for yourself. But again, like, I don't want to
But that's
totally
the
go in there. But
that's not the beginning.
Yes.
That's your reaction to it. And I would agree with you in that. But even though, because I feel like I'm pretty good at saying no to things when I need to, but that does not change my want to say yes.
Sure. Okay.
Every time someone comes to me and say, hey, can you help me with a website? My gut reaction is yes every time. But I have learned what you're talking about in when to say no and when to stand up for myself. Like, I will do that. I don't have an issue with that. But that doesn't change the fact that my gut reaction is either to one, crawl in a hole, or two, say yes. Like those are still my gut reactions. I just don't follow through on them.
Okay. Yeah, that could be. Technically, I'm an upholder, so I should be in agreement with you on the website thing, right? But my natural response to people come to me and ask for a website is like, no way. I make exceptions a few times. Lately I designed a website for somebody just because current work situation, got to put food on the table. But
right.
I don't know.
But at the same time, you're also one that follows through on your internal, and you have strong internal
That's true.
expectations, so you will prioritize those over what someone else says. So of course that would make sense. That's not you questioning, that's you knowing your priorities and knowing your what you can and can't do because you're an upholder.
Yep.
So every time you say, yeah, I can see this in myself. Well, yeah, you can, because that's an aspect of your upholder tendency.
All right.
This is fun, Mike.
I know. So should we talk about how I can be a rebel too?
Sure. This will be fun. I'll let you explain this one since you're a rebel.
All right. Well, the rebel resists outer expectations and resists inner expectations. The kind of catchphrase here is, you can't make me and neither can I. The strengths associated with a rebel, they do things because they want to do them. They don't mind breaking the rules. They often enjoy it. They enjoy defying expectations. Their biggest asset is their voice of dissent. They value authenticity and self-determination, often do better when there are no expectations. They're independent. They're able to think outside of the box, and they're spontaneous. Now, there's some of these which I am definitely not. I'm definitely not spontaneous. I would argue I am pretty independent. And there are definitely times and places when I am in full-on rebel mode. So this is tough. Like on page 176, they mentioned that rebels can tie an activity to their deep values by viewing it as an expression of who they are. And I put in parentheses core values. I feel like for a lot of stuff that I do, I need this piece. This is me unless I have that connection with like, this is the core values. This is who I am. They say you find rebels in ministry and military because they've found something big enough to deserve all their energy and devotion. So there's definitely pieces of this that I align with, and I do struggle, like if I don't understand the expectations, so rebel questioner, I'm going to argue against it, especially when it's like one more thing. My default is going to be no, and I'm going to get angry about it. And so like, I don't know, I have a real hard time pinning myself down to like the upholder because I see pieces of this at different points in my life and in different contexts.
It's interesting you see it that way, because as someone who's known you for a little while, like this, I wouldn't say that these are things about a rebel that you're relating to as much as you being very firm in your personal drive, like your inner choices. Like you've prioritized things and you are very solid on those. You're sticking to them and you are holding them tight. To me, that's more what you're doing as opposed to fighting what's out there, because this is more about, yes, you're independent as a rebel, but they're doing it because they don't want to be controlled. The mission behind it is very important there. Like to me, when you do that, it's because you feel like you're drawn towards a higher mission that's, either Christ-centered or it's based on the priorities you've set for yourself. It's not because someone else is trying to control you or someone has given you something and expected you to do it. That's not why. Whereas for a rebel, that is why. Like it doesn't have anything to do with the purpose behind the ask. It has to do with the fact that they asked at all. Do you get the difference there?
Yeah. Um, I'm not sure. Like I said, this one I struggle with. When I was, let me see, what was that? A senior in college, I guess. I went on a missions trip with Campus Crusade to North Myrtle Beach in like summer project. So it's like 10 weeks. And when I was there, I had my, the way summer project worked, at least when I went, like the staff is there, the adults for the first 5 weeks, and then they leave, and it's the students who run everything at that point. And every staff member has people that they're assigned to that they disciple while they're there. So my discipler told me before he left, he's like, you have a ton of potential, but you won't listen to anything anybody asks you to do. So full on rebel mode, you know, and I recognize that. And I've worked very, very hard over the last, however long that was, 15, 20 years to change that. But that is my default response to pretty much anytime anybody asks me to do anything is no. Sometimes I go into question mode and I figure out the why, but other times it's like, no, I don't care. And so like, I don't know. I think you could probably convince me that this is a manifestation of my upholder tendencies at some point, but.
Well, let's flip it though. Let's ask this question. Is it possible you're actually a rebel with a strong mission that you want to fulfill and it manifests itself in a way that appears to be an upholder?
Could be. I mean, my assessment results say absolutely not, but
that's fair. But I'm just asking the question because if your gut reaction is no to everything, to me it would be possible that you're doing what you want and you resist. Like, we've not talked about this, but with my corporate job, I have to do like all the email thing, and it's open all day long, notifications on, et cetera, all the things you're not supposed to do. But the culture is such that I have to do that or I'm going to lose that position, period.
Right.
My guess is that whenever I said that, you got like you cringed and your chest tightened a little bit.
Yep.
Because that is something that you feel you should never have to do because you're bending to what other people want you to do. So my thinking here, just a theory, I don't know this for certain, but maybe it's possible that you have a tendency to resist anything, internal or external, potentially, but you have a strong mission that you want to fulfill, and because that's so strong, you're able to bring yourself to doing the inner expectations as a result. Maybe that's what's going on. I could also start making some arguments around you being a questioner as well. So, right. But I don't think I could put you in the obliger category. I don't think I could do that. But I also, I can't see what your motivations are behind any of these. But if you're telling me that your gut reaction is no at every chance, my immediate thought is you're a rebel. It's just manifesting itself in a different way.
Correct. Or the framework is broken. Which is really the larger point, I think, with the 4 tendencies. And again, like maybe you're right, and these are just tendencies, and you can shift in and out of these. And if that is the case, I think I'm a lot more in agreement with them, because my gap book, which we'll get to in a little bit, is a John Maxwell book called Leadership. And the main idea at the beginning of that book is that things are always changing, and good leaders need to be always changing. The number one skill he mentions that good leaders are going to need to have is the ability to motivate others. And I know there's a whole big section in here about speaking to the other tendencies, which honestly, to me, was pretty elementary. I mean, if you were to boil it down, you want to appeal to their values and you want to appeal to their desires. That is absolutely true. But if you're speaking to me, like, which values and which desires do you appeal to? Like, therein lies the rub. And I think, like, if you're going to be a good leader, you need to be able to speak the language of the person that you're speaking to. And it's not going to be as simple as fitting into one of these 4 boxes.
Here's a question for you. sorry to interrupt you, but and then we need to finish up Rebel here. But when you went through the questionnaire for this, was it a quick process for you, or did you find exceptions to each of those questions that were being asked?
No, this is an interesting question because every assessment that I take, but be it StrengthsFinder, be it Colby, be it Gretchen Rubin's, I go through it fairly quickly. And maybe part of that is my familiarity with assessments and the process and knowing that your first instinct is usually the best answer. So I don't sit there and hem and haw and like, well, am I this or am I that? Like I just pick the one that makes the most sense. But I do that for everything. So I kind of don't think that contributed to like false positive in terms of me being an upholder.
Okay.
I don't know that for sure though.
Well, I was asking because that's what questioners do.
That's true. Yep. But you're not a questioner, so.
No, I'm not, but I'm married to one, and that woman cannot take a test. Like if it's an assessment of some sort, I'll finish a 200 question test and then go make a cup of tea because it's going to be a while. Yep. Because and part of what I'm getting at there is questioners have a tendency to not want to be categorized. They don't want to have labels put on them, which is why I was asking that question, because I wondered if you don't want any of these labels put on you.
I would accept the labels if they made any sense to me. Like I said, when I read the upholder section, I'm like, yeah, she really knows me. And then I read the questionnaire section, I'm like, well, maybe that was a fluke. And then I read the obliger section, because obliger rebellion is totally something that I've dealt with before. But again, in specific contexts. So if I've got a leader who is stronger than I am, and they're just saying that they're leading and that we have to do this, I'm gonna be an obliger, and eventually I'm gonna get to the point where no, I can't take it anymore. But there's so much nuance around the situations that I feel like at any given point I'm exhibiting different characteristics here, which like I don't like that. I want it to fit neatly in the box. I want it to be according to the the framework like an upholder. But
yeah,
I can't reconcile it in my head. Like yeah, it just doesn't work.
All right, let's finish up Rebel, and then you can rant on us if you haven't already somehow through all of this. Strengths of the Rebel: independent-minded, able to think outside the box, unswayed by conventional wisdom, willing to go his or her own way to buck social conventions, in touch with his or her authentic desires, and spontaneous. Again, they're not going to show up unless they want to. Like that's just kind of how it goes. Now, weaknesses: they are likely to resist when asked or told to do something. So you ask them something.
That's me.
One of the one of the stories was the husband would ask his rebel wife to change something about the design of, say, the porch. And she would immediately say, no, it's just fine. But then a week later would come back and have implemented the exact thing that he had recommended. Rebels can come across as uncooperative, inconsiderate.
That's me.
Have trouble accomplishing tasks that need to be done consistently the same way every time. Acts as though ordinary rules don't apply. Restless, may find it difficult to settle down in a job, relationship, or city. Struggles with routines and planning. May be indifferent to reputation. So all kinds of things in there. I think, you probably get the point. Like rebels have a tendency to just resist things. Mm-hmm. Thus the rebel label. All kinds of things that she gives for how to deal with a rebel. I can't say that too many of these struck me as groundbreaking, but the one thing that she did call out was this 3-step process of information, consequence, choice. It's always important that the rebel has a choice in the matter.
Yep.
So give them all the information about something, show them the consequences of the choice, and then say, okay, now what do you want to do? And then let them make that choice. And it seems like, from what I can tell, that works pretty well. The rebel category is one of the smallest. Or is it the smallest? Do you remember?
It is the smallest.
It is the smallest.
17%. The upholder is 19%, I believe.
Okay. So anyway, there you go. Anything else you want to say about rebels before you rant?
Well, I feel like I've been ranting a lot already, but let's just talk about this information, consequence, choice sequence. I feel like, again, this is a great idea, but should be applied to everybody. So, as an example, one of the things that you will hear working for churches or working with people at churches, and it makes sense on the surface, is that pastor's got a hard job because he or she is recruiting and trying to mobilize a volunteer army. And the point being there is that all of these people are there willingly. No one is forcing them to be there. So you can't just say, you have to do this because I'm paying you, right? Which on the surface makes a ton of sense. Having worked in a semi-corporate setting before, I will tell you, though, that it also doesn't work in the marketplace. It'll work for a little while, but those people will always burn out. And if you want to build a quality organization, a quality team, you'll recognize that stuff long before you have excuse to fire that person. Like, you can't just force and lead that way. Ultimately, and this goes back to the leadership thing, you have to motivate people to make the choices and move in the direction that you want them to move. You can't force anybody. I mean, think about the whole concept of leadership, which leadership, by the way, maybe that's the thing that's kind of coloring my perspective on a lot of this stuff, because I'm fascinated by the concept of leadership. Leadership is not a title. It is not a position. It has nothing to do with the amount of authority that you have. You cannot bend people to your will if you are a leader. You are a great motivator, you're a great communicator, and you're able to inspire people to follow you. But at any point as a leader, if you don't lead well, the people who are following you have every right to say, I don't believe this person can get me where I want to go, and they're going to stop following you, whether or not you are paying them to do a job. At least that's my view on it. And so this information consequence choice, giving people the information so they have an understanding of what will happen if they do this, what will happen if they don't do this, and then allowing them to choose, I want the desired outcome, not the negative outcome. That's, I would argue, tied to being a good communicator and a good leader, not just speaking to a rebel.
I think you're a questioner.
Could be. Who knows? My opinion
Mike.
of how do I want to say this? It's not the opinion of the book, but like at the very beginning when I was reading this, I was like, Gretchen Rubin has a spotlight into my soul. By the end of it, I'm like, she don't know me.
Oh, you're hilarious. All right, do you have a rant you want to end this with?
Nah, that's basically it. My
right.
rant would be that I like the idea, and I'm not, how do I say this? Like, this is, as a book, this is somebody's idea, right? So it doesn't have to be research-based. They're presenting a framework for things that they see. I would do the exact same thing if I was in her shoes. But based on my experience and my history and the dots that I've collected, I feel like this as a framework for understanding how I work anyways falls completely short. So by the end of this, it went from being like, oh, this is really insightful, impactful, going to change the way that I live, to, well, that was a good book. With no action items for me.
When I explained the concept of this book to my wife, the questioner, her first response was, why would people put you in 4 categories? Why do you have to pick a category? Like, and I'm seeing you embody this.
See, I think you can totally do this, though.
All right.
I think you can totally do this. I just think Gretchen Rubin, for me anyways, didn't do it very well. My opinion.
I have 2 action items. You don't have any. I see that. This has been a very fun conversation for me. The first one, I think I've mentioned both of these. External accountability with stuff at ProCourse. Yes, I've been doing that. It's been going well so far. This has been a very insightful book to me as far as my own tendency, because it's spot on. And seeing that external accountability is such a big deal, like, okay, it's made me rethink how I'm doing a number of things for the better. So one in particular is the stuff at ProCourse. Number 2 is tracking my health items, because I feel like I need the data there, and that other people are depending on me to have good health. That tracking has been extremely helpful. So I'm going to continue doing those 2. We can check in on them next time. That'd be good. Because, I need that sort of thing, whether or not
external
Mike
accountability.
But that's what I'm doing. So you can check in with me next time, Mike.
All right.
Do you have any you want to put on this list?
I do not. And as I was going
Okay.
through it, I was trying to pick those out because I didn't have any last time. And I'm like, I got to have action items for this one. Don't have any action items. I at least have quotes in my MindNode file, though.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this was a good book and an interesting book to read. I just don't think it was life-changing for me. And again, maybe that's because I've been exposed to a lot of these different assessments, a lot of these different types of things previously, and I prefer maybe the research-based ones. I'm totally willing to accept that. But yeah, this one just, at least from a assessment perspective, did not do it for me.
All right, style and rating, hit me.
All right, so Gretchen's got a very approachable style. I really like the way that she writes. I like the assessment at the beginning. I took that before I dove into the results. I'm not sure if you waited till the end or not, but
No, I did it right at the beginning because I wanted to know before I read about it.
Yep, me too. So I did that right away. That whole process was pretty quick. You get emailed the PDF. I thought that was cool. The PDF again is a little lacking, but that's just because this is something that I don't want to make it sound like no thought went into this, but compared to like a Colby assessment where you get like a 50-page PDF on here's what all your results mean, it's pretty light. I think it's 4 pages, and she basically says the same things she says in the book. There's not a whole lot more insight there. So from an assessment standpoint, I've kind of talked about, I'm not a big fan of the 4 tendencies framework. I do think there was a lot of interesting story and example about how the different tendencies related specifically. And we didn't even really get into that section about the applying the 4 tendencies and then like the different pairings and stuff like that, which is fine. I can tell you there was at least one point in this book where she was talking about the upholder obliger, because that's my wife and I read this paragraph that she had in the book, and Rachel just kind of laughed. She's like, yep, that's totally us. But like I said, that happened with lots of other sections too. So I think there's a lot of good from going through this book. I think it will present a lot of different ideas. The strengths and weaknesses are great. All the suggestions for dealing with the different people. There's a lot of stuff you can glean from there, even if you don't totally buy it into the framework like I did. So I'm going to rate this at 3.5. And I'm kind of hesitant to do that. I kind of want to rate it a 4, but I just can't get over, by the end of the book, the title is the 4 tendencies, and I'm kind of railing against the 4 tendencies. So I feel like if I were to rate it 4, that would be kind of weird.
Well,
but I like Gretchen Rubin. I'm definitely going to read more of her stuff. I just think that this book in particular didn't give me a whole lot of answers.
I felt like it gave me a lot of answers. I'll contradict you there. Again, Gretchen's an excellent writer. You can tell she's written in the past. Very engaging. Number of times I found myself having a hard time putting it down. Like, oh yeah, it's dinner time. Okay. But going through it, yes, there were some areas where, at least from my viewpoint, I saw how you can bleed over into each of these and how each of those can be manifested in, like, if you are an obliger, it's easy to not somehow, but you can have tendencies in the others. But again, it's just that. It's a tendency. You can bleed over into those others. That's my view on it. I'm not trying to lock in on any specific, but I know that me personally, going through this and understanding these 4 groupings, like, I was immediately seeing people that I work with or am related to. It's like, oh, yep, that's them. Like, they are definitely an upholder. That person is definitely an obliger. And in a handful of cases, I've changed the way that I've interacted with those people, and it's come across very positively. So big kudos from me to Gretchen, because I felt like this was spot on in a lot of cases. Again, I get your point, Mike, where the assessment is maybe a little light. Personally, I felt like reading through them after having taken that, I could see how some people would maybe morph away from those categories once they read it and realize, well, actually, some of my motivation is around this. So you're not a questioner, you're a rebel. Like, I could see how that could happen, because the questionnaire, I think, is pretty simplistic. And that's because it's not science-based, which I'm okay with. Like I'm one that's a little more free with that sort of thing. So as much as I like science-based things and I feel like I can stand on them, this one, I think for whatever reason, like it just clicked with me. So I'm good with that. I don't think that this whole thing put together the way it was put together, because I think to your point, Mike, like some of the outlining and such was weird. It was kind of hard to understand her flow of things to some degree. Like when I first read it, I was like, oh yeah, you're just doing upholders first because you are one. Like that's why you started that way. But then as I read it, I realized, well, it would be kind of weird to start with the rebel. And you can't really start with the questioner or the obliger because they're in the middle. Like you got to either start with the upholder or the rebel, and starting on the I don't want to say negative side, but the contradicting side first would be kind of jarring to jump into. So I understand why she did it. But again, I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking or super life-changing, but it's definitely changed the way that I view at least myself to quite a degree. So I don't think I'd put it at 4.5, but I will put it at 4, just because you don't think I should.
No, that's totally fine.
So our book for next time is Atomic Habits by James Clear, which I've seen around for quite a while. It's tied with the 4 Tendencies as far as number of votes on the Bookworm Club. So yes, I'm about 50 pages into this, definitely hooked. I don't have a gap book this time, but I might next time just because of how fast I'm going through this one. So looking forward to our conversation next time, Mike.
Nice. Yeah, this is going to be a fun one. My book for next time is Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, which as we're recording this was just released. So it's Cal Newport's new book, and this just pushes all of my buttons. So I want to make sure we cover this one ASAP.
Got it. Good way or bad way pushing buttons?
I feel like this one is going to convict me and make me change some things.
All right. I don't know. I saw that he had another one coming out. I listened to a podcast that he did with Jocelyn Kegley, Hurry Slowly. He did an interview with her about it when he was still writing it, I think, at the time. So I when I saw this on the list, like, yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. That'll be a good one.
Right. And then my gap book, which I mentioned I started already, is Leader Shift by John Maxwell. It's another one that, as we record this, was just released. Basic idea of this book is that if you want to be a good leader, you have to change. And there are 4 different, or I'm sorry, not 4. We just did 4 tendencies. There are 11 different shifts that you have to make, and you're constantly making them. And I've just gone through the first chapter, and I think I wrote down like 15 different quotes that he used. There's John Maxwell. I don't know if you like his style, you don't like his style, but it's definitely my style. So I really like his writing, and at least so far, anyways, this is a really good one.
Nice. All right. Well, the 4 Tendencies was a recommendation on the book club, as is Atomic Habits, which we'll go through next time. If you would like to get a book on that list of recommendations, just join the club, club.bookworm.fm, and click the recommend button. And all it does is it creates a new topic, and you just paste a link into the book. If you want to explain why, go for it. If not, just leave us the link, and other people can vote on it. But I will say, if you create a book recommendation, at least vote for yourself.
Yes.
Like it seems like quite a few folks will post the recommendation, but then they don't vote for it. But it's the votes that we're using as the ranking mechanism there. So if you do create a book recommendation, click the vote button.
Definitely. And if you want to help support the show, you can do a couple of things. Number 1, you can go buy a Bookworm t-shirt if you want, because they are for sale again.
Woohoo!
Number 2, you can use the Amazon links, which are on the book list page, which I now figured out how to update. So those are affiliate links. That list is up to date. And if you buy the book through that link, then you help out Bookworm. The last thing you could do, arguably the most important thing you could do, is that you could leave us an iTunes rating and review, because I want to take down KCRW. That's my big someday maybe goal. So join the revolution, people. Help it happen. And then also, if you have any action items, share those on the club, which is club.bookworm.fm. And for this one in particular, it would be interesting if you took the assessment because it's free to share your results, and maybe you can help me decide what I really am, and I'm not a tendency chameleon.
You're just whatever you want to be in the moment. Total rebel. All right. Once you've done all that, pick up Atomic Habits, because next time we're going to talk about habits, and I think it'll be a good conversation. James Clear has been around for a long time. I followed his writing for a long time. Super excited to see the details of his book. So join us next time, and we'll go through Atomic Habits.